Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we are going to be continuing on with our HTML tutorial series, and in this particular video we're going to start taking a look at some of the input elements in HTML that we can use in our forms. Specifically today we're going to be looking at the text input, the button input, the checkbox input, and the color input. And to go along with those, we're also going to look at labels, because labeling your fields is extremely important. And we're going to talk about the various ways of properly labeling your fields and whatnot. So let's get started with the input type text. Now, the input element is just one element, but it has multiple different types. So you can have it be a radio button, a checkbox, a button. You can have it be a text box, a text box with a number spinner, a date time picker, all kinds of stuff. And we'll be covering more of those as we go forward. But we are just going to cover a few of them today. Tomorrow, in the next video, we'll cover some more, and then we'll cover some more in the next one until we're through with all the different input types. And in each of these videos, I'm going to warn you right now, I'm going to continue to stress the importance of labeling your fields. Because if you do not label your fields, sure, maybe visually you will be able to see the label association. But if you don't properly label them, someone using a screen reader or some other assistive technology is going to have problems. And it's not going to be a fun experience. It's not good user experience, and you're going to lose users that way. So, the text type input can be created like this. So we can go and do an input less than input, and then we need our type attribute, and inside of these quotation marks we're going to say text. And the next thing we need at a minimum is a name attribute. We'll say we'll call this first dash name, like that. Now, of course, if we save our code right now and we run it in the browser, you can see we do get an input text box. But here's the thing. Assistive technologies, particularly screen readers, if you try to focus on this field, it's just going to say text or text field and nothing else. There's going to be no context as to what this field does. And that brings me to the label element and the various ways that you can label an input element. Now, for text type inputs and for number type inputs and all this and all kinds of other input elements that have a text box as part of their control, there is an attribute on the input element called placeholder. And we type it like this: placeholder equals, and then we can provide a placeholder that acts as the input's label. So say first name. Now, when we save it and we go into the browser and refresh, the next thing that you see in your browser is it's a text field that has some grayed text inside of it. Now, that's going to go away as you type, but the semantics will still be there. Now, when a screen reader focuses on the field at any time, they're going to hear first name, text field, or something similar. So now there is context as to what the field does based on its semantic information. And that's great and all. But maybe you don't want to have a placeholder attribute. Not everybody does. It can clutter up the HTML. I get it. Well, there are two other ways that you can do this. And these two other ways consist primarily of the label element. Now, you can surround the input element with a label and have a label with it, like this. So we can have a opening label element like that. And then we can have a closing label like this. And then either above or below it, either above or below the input element that is inside the label element, we can put our text label, which, let's say, first name. So we save it, and we run our code now. We refresh the browser, and we still get that semantic information. Except now there's an actual label right next to our text field, either right next to it or right above it, depending on how the browser chooses to interpret it. Most of the time, the text will be right next to the input field. Why is this? Well, because input is an inline element, and then text acts inline. So the text and the input field will be right next to one another. You can change this, of course, if you want to, but you don't have to. So that's one way. That's one way of using a label. That's one way of using a label to label a text field. What is the other way then? Well, the other way is to use a for attribute in the label element. And we'll talk about the benefits of this in a moment. So we can create our opening label element and have a for attribute. And this for attribute takes the name of an ID. So that ID attribute we talked about, that the input element that we want this label to be associated with has to have one. And we're going to say this ID is first name field. Just like that. And now we can have a label, and this label is going to say first name. Pretty simple stuff. Next, we need our input. So we can do the input type equals text, ID equals first dash name dash field, and name equals first dash name. Like that. Now go ahead and save your code. And I'm gonna go ahead and put a break element here, or a couple of them, to separate our label and input from this text up here. So now save it and reload the browser. You can see we now have the label still to the left of our input because, again, the label is an inline element and so is the input. However, while the text field doesn't have any placeholder text, it still will say first name text field with screen readers, for example. And that's great. That is a proper way of labeling the text field. Now, one of the advantages of doing of labeling your field this way with the for attribute is that if you click on the label, itself, your cursor focus, like your text editing focus, goes into the field itself. So that is extremely useful. If you don't want to click on the field and you just want to click on its label, boom, there you go. That is extremely useful for some people. And another thing too is that when you navigate the page with a screen reader, if you label your fields in this way, the text doesn't get the text of the label doesn't get focused. The text or the focus immediately moves to the text field, not the label. But the label is still recognized as its label, so it uses the text of that label to announce, the purpose of the text field. So that is the text type input and how we can label fields. Keep in mind many of these methods do also apply to other types, and we will talk about that as we get closer. Okay, and so now let's go ahead and get rid of this input. The next thing we're going to take a look at is the input type button. So this does not require a label element, but it will require something very specific. It'll require another attribute, and that's the value attribute. The value attribute will give us the text for the button that we want. There's also a submit type input element that acts exactly like type submit on the button element. So again, we're not going to look at that particularly, but that does exist. So keep that in mind. There's just multiple ways of doing it. So to create an input type button, we can say less than input type equals button. And then we need value equals, let's say, submit application. And then we close off the input. Now, save it and refresh your browser. And you can see now we have a button that says submit your application. Or submit application. Pretty straightforward. That's just another way of creating a button. Now, keep in mind, too, that, again, for the type button, you're going to need to use JavaScript to give it functionality. With type submit, again, what that will do is it will submit the form. It'll send that HTTP request to the server with the form data using the name attributes as the key in the key value pairs that are sent to the server. All right, so that was the button. Up here we can go ahead and cross off our list, text, and button. Next, we're going to take a look at the checkbox and the color elements. All right, so for the checkbox, this is going to be type equals check. It's either check or checkbox. We're going to try check first. So essentially a checkbox is like a toggle. There's a true and a false or on and off state. And I believe you can also have it where it has an indeterminate state as well. Checkboxes are generally useful for site settings or for saying, hey, sign me up for this newsletter, or hey, do not sign me up to this newsletter. Anything that requires a toggle, a checkbox is really good for. So let's go ahead and create an input checkbox. So input type equals, so it's checkbox, and then we'll have a name for subscribe. And there we go. Go ahead and save this and reload the page. Now you can see we have a checkbox. We have a checkbox here that we can go ahead and toggle on and off and all that stuff. That's pretty good and everything, but it doesn't have a label. Now all you'll hear with a screen reader, for example, is checkbox, and that's it. You won't hear anything else because there isn't anything else to report about it other than whether it's checked or not. Now, before we get to the label, I wanna also say that if you want the checkbox to be checked by default, there is a checked attribute that you can just say checked like that, and then it will automatically have it checked by default. So let's go ahead and add a label to this. So we can go ahead and do a label for equals sub cbox or chk box like that, and we'll have the label say subscribe to our newsletter. And so now the input needs a label, or rather needs an ID, so we can associate it with the label. ID equals sub-chk docs, like that. Save it, reload in the browser, And so here we are. You can see subscribe to our newsletter with the checkbox. And the label works. The label is now in place. So when you focus on the checkbox, it'll say checkbox checked or checkbox not checked, subscribe to our newsletter. And you can see because we specified that checked attribute, the checkbox is checked by default. And if you want to uncheck it by clicking the label, you can do that too. All right. So that is the checkbox input element. We're gonna delete this code. Okay, so now we're gonna look at the color input. This input is slightly different. It's not like a checkbox or a text field or anything like that. This allows you to open a color wheel and select a color. So we're definitely going to so there's no placeholder for example on this one, much like there is no placeholder for checkboxes. So we absolutely need that label to give that additional context, because if you don't, it's just not gonna make any sense to a screen reader user. I cannot emphasize that enough. So inputs type equals, and inside of these quotation marks, type color, and we're going to say ID equals team-color picker, let's say, and the name is going to be team-color, like that. Okay. And so, with that, we also need the label that goes with it. So label for equals team color picker, and have it say choose your team color, like that. Now save your code and reload your browser. Now, you can see we have our label, choose your team color. And then we have this rectangle here. This rectangle, when you click on it, if I can find my cursor, you click on this, and it brings up a color picker. And so you can use that color picker to select a color if you want. And then, when you submit the form, it'll go to the server and yada, yada, yada. Now, when you focus on a color picker with a screen reader, it will interpret it as something that's just clickable, and then it will read you the red, the green, and the blue values. It's not going to specifically say, oh, this is a color picker, or, oh, this is a color chooser, or something like that. The only indication that you'll get of it being a color picker is the fact that it will read off the red, green, and the blue values. So, that is that for the color input. And that pretty much does it for this video, guys. We covered a few different input types today and the label. We also talked about how you can properly label your fields. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we will see you all in the next one. Date, time, and Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we are going to be continuing on with our HTML tutorial series. And in this tutorial we are going to be taking a look at some of the date and or time pickers in HTML. Now, many times you're going to have to work with dates and times, and date times as well, which frankly can be a bit of a pain in the rear, but that doesn't mean selecting them in a form has to be a pain for our users, and that is why these exist. It makes it a little bit easier for users to be able to select and specify dates and times to give us to deal with. So, the first input type we're going to take a look at is the type of input date. So this is simply a date picker. Now, most people will bypass the built-in HTML input type date in favor of custom controls. But the biggest issue with those is obviously accessibility. And these built-in elements provide built-in accessibility support. So keep that in mind as you go through your development career. So, to create this input element for a date picker, you need to do less than inputs type equals date, and we're going to have an ID. This is going to be B day picker, and a name of B day. So this input element is going to allow you to specify your birthday. Now we need a label for B day picker. Specify your birthday. So now if we save this and we reload our browser, here we have our date picker. Now the browser will interpret the date picker as a bunch of spin buttons, but keep in mind that they technically act like it, but they're not a spin button, technically speaking. You can see we have our label here, specify your birth date or your birthday. And in Edge, we have a couple options to specify the date. We can specify our birth date in the actual field itself, and you can see the format is month, day, year, year. I believe you can change the format that it uses, but that's what it uses by default, at least here in the United States. And then we have this button here, right next to it. And when you click that button, what it does is it should bring up a calendar. Now, it does not, it appears to sometimes work, sometimes not. And there we go. There's the calendar. It gives us a nice calendar picker to pick the date from. Now, not all browsers support this, the calendar picker, but most of them do. At a minimum, they will support the text field with month, month, day, day, year, 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 year in it, but not all of them will have the calendar picker because some browser manufacturers may not want to support it. And they technically don't have to, but it would be nice. Okay. So now we can go back to our code. Let's change this to be type date time, and we'll take a look at what the differences are. Date time. Go ahead and save. Go back to the browser. And now you can see we still have specify your birth date, but the let's see. We can say so we can say date time like that, and we can reload the browser. Now, what this is going to do then, what it's going to do is this will accept the date and time of your birthday, or whatever you want the field to contain. Pretty simple, right? Pretty simple, right? Now, of course, Edge doesn't render anything except a text field here. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. All right, and what we can do is we're going to go reveal with File Explorer. And I'm going to open this in Chrome and see what happens in Chrome. Now let's open it with Chrome. And so you can see that Google Chrome does the same thing. But the main difference is in the semantics. So what happens here is with the screen reader, it'll interpret it as a date time field rather than just a text field like it will do in Edge. Right? So that is date time. Nothing too exciting, really. It's not like a super fancy thing. Let's go ahead now and close this sidebar. And we are going to change the input type of this to time. Just time. And what will happen? When you reload, you can see now this is what we get for a time picker. Much like the input type date, it treats the different components of the time in the time picker as spin buttons, but they're not technically spin buttons. So the format here is hours, minutes, and then the AM or PM. And then there's also a button to specify, to actually like show a time picker menu, similar to the calendar. So you click that, and this is what it shows. It shows you it'll show you this neat little picker for choosing your hour and your minute. So those are the three main types of date pickers or date input elements that we use in HTML. If I recall, there is a date time local. Date time local is relatively new, but what this will do then is this. You can see now we have a month, day, year, and the time. So we have the date and the time all in one thing, and then we can click the button at the very right of the control to open the calendar and time picker combo sort of dialog. So you click this button, and you can see it brings up a calendar, and then we also have a picker for the hours and minutes. And there should be a AM and PM option there as well. So that basically does it, guys, for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Play around with this stuff, and we'll see you in the next one.